There are places for our dead, places of peace and not dread, sites of simple or elaborate stones that memorialize our lost ones' bones. Welcome to Stones and Bones. Welcome to Stones and Bones.
Hello, you spooktacular people. Welcome to Stones and Bones number 9. I am your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we're going to be featuring Laurel Hill Cemetery in Philly.
Very good. Looking forward to it.
This is one cemetery that I have not visited yet, and I really want to get to it.
Laurel Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia became a part of the rural cemetery movement shortly after it started, becoming the third garden cemetery in America to be founded. This was not long after Mount Hope Cemetery in Maine was dedicated and revealed that the movement was spreading along the East Coast. The cemetery was much needed as the growing city had already filled up most of its churchyards. Laurel Hill would become an example for future cemeteries and today is still beloved by the residents of Philly, who flock to it to enjoy the beautiful headstones, monuments, and mausoleums. Laurel Hill has an important place in the history of cemeteries in America.
Nearly everything one reads out there states that Laurel Hill Cemetery was the second rural cemetery in America, which just isn't true. Mount Hope beat it to the punch. That being said, Laurel Hill had a significant impact on the spreading of the rural cemetery movement. And I don't know how it got set up to be the second one. It's like Mount Hope is the ugly stepsister or something like that. Yeah, the redheaded stepchild is Mount Hope, apparently, because I'm like, they were both opened in the same year, but Mount Hope beat it just by a few months. In the city of Philadelphia, people had 3 options for burial in the early 1800s. Wealthy residents who owned their own land could be buried in a family cemetery on their own property. There were the churchyards where members of a church could be buried. For the poor or racial and religious minorities, their only option was a potter's field. By 1835, the churchyards and potter's fields were pretty full, and Philadelphia needed another option. As an example of how bad it had gotten, the Friends burial ground that encompassed only half a city block had nearly 20,000 bodies buried there since it opened in 1701.
Oh my word.
Half a block with 20,000 bodies. You know people were being buried on top of each other.
John J. Smith was a Quaker and horticulturist in Philadelphia, and he was inspired by Père Lachaise outside of Paris to create something similar for his city. No doubt he had also heard of the success of Mount Auburn in Cambridge as well. One of the driving forces behind his decision to found the cemetery is that his daughter had been buried in an overcrowded cemetery, and he couldn't even locate where her burial was anymore. John Jay rounded up several prominent Philadelphians to help him, and they formed the Laurel Hill Cemetery Company. Those members included Edward Coleman, Nathan Dunn, George N. Baker, William M. Meredith, Henry Toland, Benjamin W. Richards, Frederick Brown, and Nicholas Biddle. This group acquired 32 acres to start the cemetery.
The cemetery company chose Scottish-born architect John Notman's design for the cemetery because Notman embraced the location along the Schuylkill River. He designed the imposing Roman Doric gatehouse that sits on Ridge Avenue. He also designed a Gothic Revival-style chapel. That chapel was demolished in the 1880s to make room for more graves. The plot of land that made up Laurel Hill sat 100 feet above the river, and the soil offered good drainage. Being a horticulturist, Smith guided the planting of trees and botanical species from all over the world to create a landscaped arboretum. He was successful, as landscape designer and editor of the horticulturist magazine Andrew Jackson Downing wrote of Laurel Hill that it was a, quote, charming pleasure ground filled with beautiful and rare shrubs and flowers. Downing believed that Laurel Hill was one of the 3 best examples of a garden cemetery in the United States.
Burial lots were sold starting at $50 and running up to $150. so burial at Laurel Hill was reserved for the wealthy.
Now, if you think about what $50 and $150 was back then, that was a lot of money.
Indeed. As a matter of fact, blacks and the poor were barred from burial here. This cemetery was meant to be an elite for-profit burial ground. The one thing the cemetery didn't segregate against was religion. Any wealthy person from any sect could be buried on the grounds, although Jews and Catholics didn't take them up on this and rather established their own cemeteries nearby. Blacks also created their own garden cemetery named Lebanon Cemetery in 1849. Blacks wouldn't be welcomed into Laurel Hill until 1973.
Can you imagine?
I know, it's insane. A lot size at Laurel Hill averaged 120 square feet, which made it possible to bury several family members, and most prominent families hired a sculptor or architect to design a memorial or monument for the plots. These memorials and monuments basically made the cemetery an outdoor art museum. The first burial took place in October of 1836, but Laurel Hill wasn't open to the public until 1837.
By 1844, 900 families owned plots in the cemetery and 30,000 people were visiting annually. After opening, Laurel Hill had many of the same visiting restrictions as other garden cemeteries. Riders on horseback were prohibited, and one of the main reasons they said that is because people were bad drivers, I guess. And it wasn't that they were driving cars, of course, they were driving carriages, but they said there was a lot of accidents when you had people on horseback. So,
I thought it was going to be road apples, but I guess...
well, that could be a heck of an accident, too, if you're walking through the cemetery and... Only ticket-bearing plot owners could bring their carriages into the cemetery. Laurel Hill allowed anyone to walk into the cemetery 6 days a week, but Sunday visits were very strict. People could only enter on foot, and they had to have tickets. One visitor to Laurel Hill wrote, "There were 4 other passengers in the omnibus besides myself. When we arrived at the gate of the cemetery, they had no ticket and couldn't get in. However, as mine gave permission to take 3 friends with me, I took them under my friendly protection and, with the assistance of the gatekeeper, got all 4 in."
Well, that was nice at least.
Yeah. The reasons for all these rules were because the cemeteries had become very popular as tourist attractions. They were the nicest parks in town, so of course everybody wanted to go here on the weekends to hang out and enjoy, a little relaxation. And if you think about it, the working man in town, what day of the week do you think they probably were off?
Sunday.
And if you had to walk to this cemetery, and it was pretty far outside of town, you didn't have your own carriage, it really was not meant for the middle class, the working person, the poor people to even come visit. So they didn't want you really being buried there, and they didn't want you coming to visit either. The managers of the cemetery decided that they needed to expand the original 32 acres, and they bought 3 additional tracts of land to increase the acreage to 92, with purchases in 1844, 1855, and 1861. That proved to not be enough, and in 1869, West Laurel Hill Cemetery was established, and the original cemetery became Laurel Hill East. So now Laurel Hill Cemetery is basically 2 cemeteries. Over the years, the cemetery filled up with obelisks, memorials, monuments, sculptures, and mausoleums. And these mausoleums are huge. This reminded me a lot of going to Bell Fountain in St. Louis, Missouri. It's just so gorgeous. I just love these places that are full of mausoleums. The most notable sculpture at Laurel Hill features Sir Walter Scott and his pony Old Mortality. These are 3 sandstone statues known collectively as Old Mortality, and symbolize the efforts of the cemetery managers to create an enduring final resting place. As described by the periodical Atkinson's Casket in 1837, the figure of Old Mortality reclining on a gravestone, which he has been chiseling and cleaning to preserve it from losing its inscription, is one of the most expressive specimens of the art we have ever seen. He is holding the celebrated conversation with Sir Walter Scott, detailed in the beautiful introduction to the novel. Sir Walter is represented as full-size, and it is the only full-length statue of him in existence.
Wow.
Yeah. Joy Giguere writes in her Pleasure Grounds of Death, the Rural Cemetery in 19th Century America, "The grouping would make Philadelphia stand out among the cities participating in the rural cemetery movement, for it is something for Philadelphia to boast of that she possesses the only stone resemblance of this great author and good man." The following decade, the Guide to Laurel Hill Cemetery described the figures and made explicit the sculpture's major purpose. The managers of the cemetery, in placing these figures on the grounds, had in view the possibility of embodying the idea that Laurel Hill is to be permanent, as Old Mortality loved to repair defaced tombstones. So the originators of the plan of the cemetery hope it may be the study of their successors to keep the place in perpetual repair and to transmit it undefaced to a distant date. With Old Mortality in place, Laurel Hill would also be more than a cemetery. It would be an open-air art museum.
Another interesting memorial was a broken column at the James N. Barker plot. The broken column had appeared on slate headstones in the past, but this was new to have it used as a freestanding memorial. They are used to indicate a young life cut short. We don't know this for sure, but his wife Mary died at the age of 45, and we think that this is for her because James lived into his 70s. The Pennsylvanian described it in this way in 1838.
The capital, alas, is wanting, and the broken fragment with its chaste and touching eloquence tells the story of the husband's and the parents' loss. How like the story of human life and human hopes. The column of hopes and wishes erect on earth is always broken before the capital can be placed on its appropriate summit. So I just like the way that it put that, because columns always have a capital on top, and so if it's a broken one, of course, it's not going to have even the possibility of having the capital there. So it's definitely an unfinished life. There are over 33,000 people buried here, and several are notable people. Having more well-known people here started early on as the managers of Laurel Hill decided to have revolutionary figures reburied in the cemetery. So it's like, we need some clout here.
Oh, wow.
So let's go dig some people up and bring them in.
Oh, my word.
Now, I'm assuming that the families agreed to have this done. So 3 of those people were Continental Congress Secretary Charles Thompson, who was disinterred from his wife's Lower Merion estate, which was called Harriton. First Director of the Mint, David Rittenhouse, who was removed from his family farm in Germantown, and Hugh Mercer, who was a hero from the Battle of Princeton, and whose remains were disinterred from under the central aisle at Christ Church. I can't imagine going into a church and breaking up the aisle so that you could get that body out of there.
This blows my mind. These are probably the spirits haunting the place.
Yes, because we have...
I'd be pissed.
We have covered Laurel Hill in one of our haunted cemeteries episodes, so it does have some haunts going on there, but of course, we don't talk about those here on Stones and Bones. Many military figures were buried here during and after the Civil War. Major General George Meade was the commander of the Army of the Potomac and beat General Robert E. Lee at the Battle of Gettysburg. While President Abraham Lincoln was happy with Meade's victory, he felt that the general should have pursued General Lee more effectively during the retreat of the Confederate forces, and this is something that we learned a lot about when we did our tour at the Gettysburg battlefield, and we went and saw Sachs Bridge, and we went down there and looked at all that. A second falter led President Lincoln to remove Meade from his command of the Army of the Potomac. Meade died in 1872 from pneumonia and was buried at Laurel Hill. And a little fun fact, the actor Matthew Fox, he played Jack Shepherd of Lost. That is his great-great-great-grandson.
Oh, wow. Millionaire's Row is the final resting place for prominent Philadelphians. Like saw manufacturer Henry Diston, who was born in 1819. He started Diston Saw Works in 1850 as the Keystone Saw Works, changing the name in 1865 to Henry Diston and Son when his son joined him. The largest saw manufacturing facility in the world was opened in 1872 as the Diston Saw Works. The factory covered 300 acres and employed 8,000 people. Diston ran Tuckney as a company town, and he was a benevolent boss who made sure all of his employees could buy a house. Henry fell ill in 1877 and later had a stroke that took his life in 1878 at just 58 years old. The company would carry on his work and cast the first crucible steel in America from an electric furnace in 1906 and contributed greatly to the World War II efforts. This company started with Diston handsaws, which are not made anymore, but the brand name still exists as Diston Precision Inc.
Publisher George W. Childs was born in 1829 in Baltimore, Maryland. He came to Philadelphia when he was a teenager, and he got his first job in a bookstore. He became a partner in a publishing house named Childs and Peterson. In 1864, Childs purchased the Public Ledger with several other men, and this newspaper became highly respected under his guidance. He built a small suburban town for people with modest incomes. He died in 1894 at the age of 64 and is buried in a large mausoleum that features 6 columns. These places are just gigantic. I mean, Millionaire's Row When you go to an old historic downtown area is really something to see with all the old mansions. And then here you've got these people who are actually building their mausoleums like their Millionaires Row. Must really be cool.
Very neat.
And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors.
William Henry Kimball was born in New Jersey in 1828. He came to Philadelphia as a teenager and learned the silk and cloth trade. After gaining experience, he went to New York City to work for an import house. He returned to Philly when he was 20 and opened a lace and embroidery house, later selling his interest in the cloth business in the 1850s, and parlayed the money he made into successfully developing a city railway transit. In 1875, he joined forces with P.A.B. Widener and William L. Elkins, and they bought streetcar companies, beginning the Philadelphia Traction Company in 1883. He later became Pennsylvania State Treasurer from 1865 to 1868. Kimball was a good man who raised money for victims of the Johnstown flood and stood against and condemned racial attacks by the Democratic political machine in Philly that tried to keep blacks from the polls. He died in 1891 at the age of 63, and he was buried in a very large mausoleum on the Row.
We just mentioned P.A.B. Widener. He was born Peter Arrell Brown Widener in Philly in 1834. Not only did he help build the trolley line, but he started making his money supplying mutton to the Union Army during the Civil War. He helped found U.S. Steel and the American Tobacco Company, and acquired substantial holdings in Standard Oil and International Mercantile Marine Company.
He wasn't involved with any really big companies at all. I mean, steel, tobacco, and Standard Oil. Holy cow.
His son and grandson died aboard the Titanic. Widener died in 1915 at the age of 80 and was buried in a mausoleum on the Row. And speaking of the Titanic, there are 6 victims and survivors buried at Laurel Hill. Lily and Olive Potter were survivors that are buried here.
And to take down the fourth wall just for a moment, the way we recorded these episodes is, even though Stones and Bones is coming out before the regular episode, we recorded the regular episode first, and at the very end of that, we have an email that somebody sent us about Titanic and hauntings, and so we talk about that, and now here we have Titanic.
Here we are.
Victims in the cemetery.
Synchronicity.
We talked about John B. Stetson on our Haunted to Land episode. Kelly, you know he's the man who created the Stetson hat, also known as the boss of the plains.
Yeehaw! No,
or
just
the
kidding.
perfect cowboy hat. He died in DeLand in 1906, but was brought back to Philly for burial in West Laurel Hill Cemetery, which I think they might have told us when we took a tour of the winter home. I don't remember them telling us that he had been sent back to Philly for burial. So I was like, I saw the name on the list for famous people that were buried here, and I'm like, Stetson, is it that Stetson? Sure enough, it is. So I thought that was pretty cool. John Kaysen was born in 1813 in Pennsylvania and is considered one of the giants of American ornithology and was America's first taxonomist. He worked as curator and vice president at the Philadelphia Academy of Natural Sciences and focused on the systemic classification of the Academy's extensive collection of birds. He was one of the founders of the Delaware County Institute of Science and published several books describing 194 new species of birds. Can you imagine that you're like in charge of new species?
So cool.
And what's even cooler is because he was at the cusp of all these birds being identified and stuff, 5 species of North American birds are named for him. He also has a cicada and a mineral named in his honor.
Oh, interesting.
He died in 1869, and I had no idea that there were different names for cicadas. I thought they were just cicadas.
Reminds me of the movie The Big Year.
Yes.
With Jack Black and everything. That was funny.
And we love bird watching, so
we do.
I definitely wanted to include him on this one.
David Rittenhouse was born in 1732 and was an American astronomer, inventor, clockmaker, mathematician, surveyor, scientific instrument craftsman, and public official. Rittenhouse was a member of the American Philosophical Society and the first director of the United States Mint. Rittenhouse built the first observatory in the country in 1770 at 7th and Arch Streets in Philadelphia. When he died in 1796, he was buried somewhere else. He was moved to Laurel Hill in 1878 and is located in Section P, Lot 61 to 62.
Yeah, first when I was like, he was born in 1732, I'm like, how in the world is he going to have been buried here? Like he was either really, really old or something happened here. So he was one of those people that got moved. I had to include this next one, too, because it's Adam Forepaugh.
But of course.
He was born in 1831 and went on to become famous with the circus. So if you guys have not listened to our Haunted Circus miniseries, you really must. We talk a lot about Forepaugh there. From 1865 through 1890, his circus operated under various names, including Forepaugh's Circus, Forepaugh's Gigantic Circus and Menagerie, the Forepaugh Show, and it was like the number 4 and then PAW. Maybe it's because people didn't know how to say his name. I don't know.
Probably.
The Adam Forepaugh Circus and Forepaugh and the Wild West. He got started in the circus because he was a horse trader and he was owed some money. So he acquired a circus for the unpaid debt. Can you imagine? You're like, you owe me $10,000 for horses. And they're like, well,
here's my circus.
I have a circus. I'm glad that happened because he did some amazing things with the circus. In the 1870s and 1880s, Forepaugh and P.T. Barnum had the 2 largest circuses in the United States and competed fiercely. His innovations included commission of the first railroad cars for a traveling circus in 1877, the first 3-ring presentation, so he was the master of the 3-ring circus, and the first Wild West show. Forepaugh died in 1890 at the age of 58, and he's buried beneath a large obelisk. It's not a very grand. I was expecting some big grand thing with animals all over it, and it's just a very simple obelisk.
Another interesting marker belongs to Catherine Drinkhouse Smith, who passed in 1893. She was a Victorian spiritualist and considered one of the best mediums of her time. Her marker is made of white bronze zinc and not only includes her exact time of death, but says of her, quote, accomplished great good in spreading this beautiful truth and in demonstrating a continuity of life.
But of course, because she was a spiritualist.
Of course.
Showing that we continue to go on afterwards. And her husband he's like on one side and she's on the other with their, the writing for the inscriptions for their headstones. And they both have like their exact time of death, which apparently was very important to the spiritualists. So thought that was interesting. Alexander Milne Calder was the sculptor of the William Penn statue that sits atop City Hall. He designed the tomb for William Warner Jr., who was a coal merchant. This is one of the most weird and cool and wow, creepy, all kinds of things going on.
Unique.
Monuments I've ever seen. Now, it's described as one of the most curious pieces of funerary sculpture. I mean, just putting it as most curious, it doesn't even encompass.
Doesn't touch it?
No. The sculpture features a larger-than-life female lifting the lid from the coffin of William Warner, and today now part of her arms are broken off, so she's just like this half-armed thing, which adds to the creep factor. And as she's lifting the lid to that coffin up, it's as if she's letting his soul escape. And it's not just like you see the coffin open and you're assuming that's happening. You actually see his soul is coming out of it. It's depicted there too. And it's some kind of this white blobby thing that has this male face and a wing next to it.
Oh my.
It's weird. We will put it up on Instagram.
Yeah, I was going to say, I need to look that up later.
Yeah, it is creepy. So that was just a smattering of the notable people that are buried here, as they like to put it. As far as we're concerned, everybody's notable. But for people who have some kind of a history there that's listed, there are so many here at Laurel Hill that when you go to Wikipedia and it lists them, it has its own separate page you have to go to for all of the names that are listed in alphabetical order. So there's literally hundreds. So I just picked out a few that I thought were interesting. In 1913, a Doric receiving vault was constructed from terracotta and placed by the bridge that connects South Laurel Hill to Central Laurel Hill. By the time the Second World War was over, Laurel Hill had fallen into decline and was plagued by vandalism. So what's really sad is you had the original managers and the men who founded this and set it up. You know, they put that sculpture there of old mortality because they wanted to show this is going to be here for all of time. It's going to be preserved and all this stuff. Well, unfortunately, that didn't happen for a time there. Neglect left the future of Laurel Hill unstable, if you can imagine that as well. So if anybody's haunting this place, it should have been the managers during that time going, what are you doing to our legacy? But Philadelphians came to the rescue in the 1970s. In 1978, the Friends of Laurel Hill Cemetery was founded by Drayton Smith, who was a direct descendant of John J. Smith. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, very cool.
He was joined by his wife, Jane, and historian John Francis Marion. Marion was the member who launched the popular tradition of nighttime Halloween tours. Yay!
Oh, awesome.
Thank you to him. The committee got the cemetery on the National Register of Historic Places and designated as a National Historic Landmark. Laurel Hill was the first cemetery to attain that distinction of being a historic landmark. They raised funds to restore landscaping, public buildings, and hundreds of monuments. A funeral home was added in 1997 and took on its official name of Laurel Hill Funeral Home in 2022. In 2013, Laurel Hill acquired a bronze statue that was made in 1883 that features a Civil War soldier. This is called the Silent Sentry and weighs 700 pounds and stands over 7 feet tall.
Wow.
Apparently, it had been stolen from its original location and they were trying to hawk it at some kind of a metal place.
Oh,
and
good
the guy
grief.
reported it, so here it came to the cemetery. Today, the cemetery features over 8,500 specimens of trees and shrubs, representing over 1,000 unique species and cultivars, including several state champion trees, as well as a variety of display gardens, and this includes the Dwarf Conifer Garden. Thousands of visitors enjoy public programs at Laurel Hill, including concerts, theatrical performances, photo workshops, films, ghost hunts, car shows, astronomy nights, and walking tours. They really do it all at Laurel Hill. I don't know any other cemetery that does as much as Laurel Hill does to bring in the community.
Laurel Hill is one of the most interesting and beautiful cemeteries in the country. It would be fun to catch a movie there while sitting amongst the tombstones. If you are ever in Philly, be sure to check out the stones and bones that are there.
Kelly, usually we don't add in listeners' emails and such on Stones and Bones, but I thought we have to share this one on this Stones and Bones because it's about episode 8. It's hilarious. It's from our listener, Becky. She writes, "Hey, Diane and Kelly, longtime listener, first-time responder. Love this show. Sorry this is lengthy, but I think you'll understand why by the time you get to the end of this novel. When I was listening to the opening of this episode, I was reminded of my grandfather's wife's funeral. He married her after my grandmother died, FYI, which is why she described it as my grandfather's wife.
Right.
To give a little context, you need to understand that I have always loved humor and still live to make people laugh. My whole family has just always had a thing for laughing in moments that really should be reserved for silence. And before people judge, I've been taught and have taught my children to respect the dead and their families. I mean, I'm from Tennessee and we still have decorations and homecomings in May for the cemeteries every year. Every year! This I will never understand. Anyway, the following events for real happened and my children can back this up. So this lady died. My husband and I and our 4 children went to the funeral because we were kind of expected to. I hate funerals and weddings, just get it over with already. And we found a pew kind of toward the back. My parents were sitting with my granddad in the family section, but I wanted to sit in the back because it's always the back rows that get to leave first. First rule of the funeral etiquette right there. We were just being bored, listening to the ramblings of people we didn't know, when all of a sudden we hear a cell phone ringtone that makes me snort out loud. It was the ringtone of AC/DC's Highway to Hell.
Oh, no. Oh, man.
I tried to cover my snort with a cough, but my daughter, who had not yet learned her inside voice, said with very wide eyes, "Oh my God, Mom, did you hear that?" I'm trying to shush her because some guy is still speaking in that funeral monotone while the person with the phone is attempting to melt into the seat across the aisle. And then it just goes from bad to worse at that point. The preacher gets up to give the eulogy and is talking about the lady and how she was suddenly taken from us, blah, blah, but he decides to coin a phrase that haunts me to this day. She had a long, hard struggle, but God finally stepped in and snuffed her out.
What? Oh, no! What in the world?
Ladies, I like to have died.
Oh,
Another snort, covered by an extreme coughing fit because all of my children were making those snorting noises and giggling. The worst part was that this guy was totally serious and had no idea what he had just said.
oh my gosh.
I glanced at the family area and saw my mom glaring at me because she knew. She just knew. It was me and my family who couldn't hold it together. Did it stop there? Oh no!
Oh, jeez.
Then Right before the viewing, someone had decided to follow through with their promise to this lady to play her favorite song from her favorite movie, Titanic. Yep, you guessed it. My heart will go on.
Oh. This just, oh my word. Oh my Diane's ready to slam her fist on the
heart
desk.
will go on. No, it won't. At this point, it was useless to pretend that this was not the most hilarious service I had ever been in. Rated right up there with Bill Engvall or Tim Hawkins, and I got in totally free. Needless to say, when it was our turn to view the corpse, we knew it was going to be a struggle, and it was. Whoever did this lady's makeup must have worked for Kiss, because she was smeared up so bad.
Oh, man.
Well, it was just awful. Props to my kiddos, though. They just glanced up at me with big, bulging, tear-filled eyes, not from sadness, but because they were about to burst out laughing, and then tucked their heads and almost ran out of that parlor and out the door. Like I said, I know it's hard to believe that there was so much drama at this lady's funeral, but it is absolutely 100% true. I couldn't make this up, and I'm a writer, so that says something. Thank you for all you do to impart historical knowledge and humor with the Ghostly podcast. I truly enjoy this. Y'all have very pleasant voices and make the show very interesting and keep it family friendly for everyone. And that is something that I truly appreciate. I recommend your shows to anyone who asks and some who don't. Hope y'all have a blessed evening. Keep up the great work. Well, thank you so much for that, Becky. Oh
I have tears in my eyes from laughing.
As you can tell, we are dying laughing over here. It was as though we were sitting right there with you in real time at the funeral, giggling in the pews as the ridiculousness increased. Yes, you couldn't make this up, but you certainly know how to tell a story too.
Thank you, Becky.
And this is the second time we've heard from people that highway to hell has been part of a funeral.
That is true.
Thanks so much for joining us on this episode. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Stones and